Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Rittner of the Rittner Floral School, and I'd like to welcome you into one of our classrooms today because we've got a really neat program planned for you. Now, I know I say that every time I get up here in front of you guys, but I really mean it. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this one because what we're going to be doing today is a garden type design. Now, what do we mean by garden type design? There are two very different concepts on this. Some people look at garden type designing as basically garden flowers maybe placed in a traditional manner or non-traditional manner in a basket or container of some sort. In other words, things you just have growing in your garden. Another approach to garden type designing are things just growing very naturally as if they happen to be growing out in the wild. Well, that's kind of what we're going to be doing today, the latter, and I think you're going to really find it kind of fun. We're going to be using some very neat materials, and let's get right to work in terms of using it. Hey, bird of paradise, strelitzia, one of my favorites, a very pretty exotic. It's something that most people love. If they like an exotic flower, it certainly feels benevolent. People enjoy their use. And we're going to work a couple of our bird of paradise into this design. And notice how immediately, just by placing the bird of paradise in there, you've got something that definitely has a commanding kind of presence. Now we're going to use some other interesting materials, and we have some really cool things here in our design. A lot of stuff brought in from Blooming Beloit, Wisconsin, from Israel. An enormous range of Israeli materials that are really cool. This is Xanadu. Isn't this stuff cool? It's in the philodendron family. It's a very neat foliage. And I'm going to take some of our Xanadu, and I'm going to work some of these into our design. And we're going to work our Xanadu in where we're going to place one over here. And although we consider this to be a foliage, it's certainly an architectural type foliage. In other words, we think of this as having a commanding presence and shape that definitely make a statement. They're not used so much for filling mechanics, but rather are used to create shape, form, pattern. And notice that with three of my Xanadu coming over here, we're using them almost as if we would use a flower. I'm going to do a similar process with more of my Xanadu from Blooming Beloit over here. Use this for a little bit of height and also, again, for some interesting effect. And I'm going to take another one, place it over here. So I'm really having some fun using some of my foliage material to come up with a very interesting effect. I'm going to use another one, again cutting it down and then working it over here. This stuff is really cool because it has an interesting kind of personality in terms of the shape, yet at the same time, although it has an interesting shape personality, it's not overly large. It's a medium kind of material, and it works very well to come up with interesting structure. Now let's see, what other interesting things can we use in our design? Well, we certainly can play with some other interesting materials that are coming in from Israel at the present time. This is called ornithogalum. It's the ornithogalum dubium, and it's really kind of cool. We're getting it in right now in the yellow and also in the orange. I'm going to concentrate, though, on using the yellow today because I think that the yellow gives us a kind of a nice contrast with our bird of paradise. I'm going to work a little bit of the ornithogalum dubium into the design. I'm going to put a few pieces over in here. And then similarly, just as this thing is kind of growing out in the wild somewhere, I'm going to work maybe a piece over here on this side of my ornithogalum dubium, and then maybe a shorter piece over here. In other words, it's almost like we've got a crop of things just kind of growing out somewhere in nature and giving us an interesting effect. Let's take another piece and work another piece of our ornithogalum dubium coming down here. That's kind of interesting. Now, what else can we play with? I'm looking through some of the very cool materials that I have that have just come in from Israel. How about this? This is dianthus. It's the green trick dianthus. It kind of looks kind of fuzzy and furry, and kind of a wild kind of thing. Believe it or not, when I was younger, I had hair that looked like this. I don't have so much now, but in the old days I did. Mine wasn't green, however. But we're going to play with a little bit of our trick dianthus, and let's work some of that into our design. And so I'm going to take a little piece of my dianthus and work some here, and maybe one over slightly to one side over here. This stuff is really cool, and incidentally, it's a very good keeping material as well. It holds up very well. Let's work a few over on that side, and I'm going to also work some over on this side as well. Let's take one of our dianthus and place over here. So whatever I'm doing on one side, and I'm using similar materials to come up with an interesting effect on the other side of our design. So here we've got another one over placed in here. And then let me cut another one. But you know, before I place my other one, I'm going to take another very neat product, one that I love, sunflower. Sunflower. Isn't this a great product? Sunflower automatically, whenever we use sunflower, it automatically gives a happy kind of feeling. People love our sunflowers because they're pretty, they're cheerful, they give a very, very cool effect, and they seem to just bring sunshine into any room that they happen to be in. And I'm using my sunflower, although sunflower definitely has quite a long stem, I'm cut them fairly short and I'm using them in fairly tight towards the base, almost as a focal kind of point on my design. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a little bit more of my trick dianthus and place another piece over here. And I have a little bit more left in terms of some of my dubium. So I'm going to work a little bit more ornithogalum here. In other words, I'm mixing them all together in our design so we come up with a very, very interesting kind of thing. Perhaps this isn't exactly like my garden outside, a little bit wilder, but boy, in my dreams, I'd love to have a garden with some of this stuff growing in it. Oh, now, what can we do to kind of give this an even more wild look? How about some of our curly willow? Curly willow is such a cool material. Floral designers love it because it generally adds kind of a wild, untamed look to our design. Even if our designs are tamed or controlled, the use of curly willow kind of helps it feel a little bit like it's a little wilder and kind of gives us this kind of thing shooting out in all directions. So I'm going to take some curly willow, place it over on this side. I'm going to take another piece of curly willow and I'm going to place it over onto this side as well. Notice that by doing it, it's giving us that wild kind of look, and also at the same time, if you would look, my viewer, it extends our eye up even higher into the design. So this design may have started looking fairly small, but it's not so small anymore. It definitely has some interesting things going on. I'm going to take just another piece or two of my curly willow, and I'm going to place it over here. In other words, just incorporate it in a little bit more into this part, and I'm going to work another one over here as well. What do you think? It's interesting, isn't it? Now, this kind of design isn't for somebody with traditional tastes. Obviously, the kind of person who'd enjoy this kind of design likes a little bit more of the avant-garde, a little bit more of the contemporary, and certainly this one does that kind of an effect. I'm going to take a little bit of my moss material, and we've already kind of put some of our moss materials in around the sides. I'm going to fill in with a little bit of moss to cover our mechanics because that's considered important in terms of our workmanship and making our design nice and finished as far as our design is concerned. So notice that we've got a very interesting combination of materials in this design. We've got some of our strelitzia as a starting point, and then we shot right into the Israeli stuff, some of the beautiful materials from blooming Beloit, Wisconsin, that they're importing from Israel. We've got some of our Xanadu foliage, which is being used very, very nicely structurally. We're using some of our dubium, ornithogalum. We're working some of our trick dianthus, and then some of our sunflowers worked in here as well. And then finally finishing it off with some of our curly willow that makes it bigger and really gives a really, really interesting effect. Well, my viewer, I hope that you enjoyed this brief trip into Rittner Floral School today. As you can see, quick, easy, that's the Rittner Floral School way. The idea is to make this quick and easy so that you can learn floral designing and learn both contemporary as well as traditional styles and do it and enjoy the whole process of it. I love teaching floral designing, and if part of my enthusiasm shows here, I hope so, because we think these things are so neat. And we hope that you enjoyed this presentation. On behalf of the staff and students at Rittner Floral School in Boston, Mass., this is Dr. Steve Rittner, Rittner Floral School. We thank you for coming in and visiting with us today. Bye.